always thought death would feel like silence. Turns out, dying sounds like cicadas, loud, relentless, jubilant, like the universe mistook my murder for summer music. If you have never been drowned in a Louisiana bayou by the people who raised you, let me set the mood. Humidity thick as betrayal. Rot that smells like old secrets and wet rope. Cypress trees leaning over black water like judges ready to pass sentence. And me, just one girl in a borrowed white dress, taught to say grace before dinner and obey before thinking. My name is Evelyn Hart, and the night they killed me, I wore pearls my foster mother picked out and hope I stitched myself. I thought family meant protection. I thought love meant safety. Maybe you did too. Once. Tell me, if the ones who tucked you into bed also tied your ankles with rope, would you blame fate or yourself first? Ye blamed myself. Of course, ye did. Good girls always blame themselves until anger digs a hole deep enough to bury innocence and grow something sharper. That night, the Hart house glowed warm from the outside lanterns, flickering across the old sugar-barren columns, jasmine perfuming the porch like forgiveness wearing lipstick. Inside, the air conditioning hummed like polite gossip. Margaret Hart held court in cream, silk, and pearls the size of envy. Judge Whittaker Hart, father by paperwork and ambition, smoothed his tie like truth should respect his collar. Bianca and Andrew, their daughter and son, polished their smiles like weapons. They would spend years shaping me. Charm school, voice lessons, etiquette, charity galas. Not out of love, oh no. Out of investment. I was a bond maturing toward a marriage asset with the Cole family in Houston. The Coles had oil money and old money cruelty. The Harts had fame, land, and hollow walls. Now together, they were aiming for a dynasty press release. I was supposed to be the bride, obedient and grateful. Cute, how they forgot I still had a pulse. When Harrison Cole slipped that ring box toward me at the gala, I should have smiled and rehearsed joy. Instead, I breathed air that tasted like gunmetal and said one syllable that detonated my life. No. He blinked, confused like a man accustomed to... Yes. Bianca's fingers tightened on her champagne flute. Margaret's eyes sharpened. The judge measured the room, calculating optics. I stood straighter, spine suddenly remembering it belonged to me. I am not marrying for power, I said. And I am not selling myself for your debts. Silence swallowed the chandeliers. If you have ever dropped a match into a church, you know that hush. Hot, disbelieving, sacred in its fury. Later, they drove me out into the dark. No arguments. No raised voices. Evil does not need volume when it has authority. Andrew whistled a hymn. Bianca braided my hair absently like she was soothing a child. The judge drove. Margaret sat beside me. Perfect posture, perfect lipstick, perfect lie. You could have been a queen, she murmured. I would rather be a person. Her smile cracked. Foolish child. You were our project, not our blood. It's funny how they waited until the end to say the quiet part out loud. At the boat ramp, they wrapped my ankles in chain. Margaret kissed my forehead like she was returning a flawed purchase. Andrew pushed. Water rose cold and certain. Have you ever drowned in betrayal? It burns first. Then everything slows. Like grief learning to swim. I saw moonlight through moss. Heard my heartbeat apologize. Then nothing. Except the bayou did not want me. Crawfishers found me tangled in lilies at dawn, mud smeared across my face like war paint. They thought I would fallen. Poor men. The world trains good people to doubt horror. Easier than believing monsters sleep in monogrammed sheets. I woke in the hospital, wrapped in blankets and pity. They called it a boating accident. Margaret brought flowers. The judge shook a sheriff's hand. Bianca cried on command. Andrew signed a cast I did not have. I smiled for photos. The perfect survivor. Inside, something calcified. Do you know the moment your innocence dies? Mine tasted like salt water and promises I planned to shatter. I did not report them. Not yet. Revenge is not a sprint, it is choreography. You do not hand justice the knife until you have aimed it. Instead, I played resurrection. I moved into a motel outside town, peeling paint, buzzing neon Bible in the drawer. I healed in secret, plotting like prayer. I bought burner phones, tracked state laws, memorized sheriff schedules, learned who in town believes in sin when they are not drinking. I stopped being a girl and became a ledger. Revenge is not rage. It is accounting. The first move was not legal. It was psychological. A week later, I walked back into Augustine High, like I had not spent a night in the swamp. People stared. Whispers followed like heat shimmer. Is not, she thought. She died, miracle money fixes a lot. I liked that one, because I did not need them to believe I lived. I needed them to remember I was watching. Thalia Stone found me by the lockers. She looked like a sunrise with a GPA fierce jaw, soft heart, eyes that caught cruelty before it landed. My old almost friend. My almost confidant. My almost sister? We would drifted apart last life after the hearts whispered poison into my ears. I would believed them. Regretted it every night after. She touched my arm like testing if I was solid. Eve, she breathed. What happened to you? He swallowed lightning. I got tired of drowning quietly. She did not ask more, smart girl. Those who survive trauma know not to poke fresh wounds unless invited. That night, the hearts threw a welcome back and congratulations to Andrew for valedictorian party. The town came, wearing pearls and hypocrisy. Margaret smiled like forgiveness. The judge toasted resilience. Bianca glowed malicious and sweet. Andrew posed near banners announcing his scholarship. Then the principal arrived with a fresh envelope. The room leaned in. Valedictorian, he announced, voice echoing off portraits and ego. Thalia Stone. Silence fell like a chandelier. Andrew's smile curdled. Bianca's fingers dug crescent moons into her clutch. Thalia looked shocked in the gentlest, deadliest way, dignified, as though triumph was not a debt owed, but a fact earned. I moved first. Clap. Slow, sharp, deliberate. Others followed. Applause rolled like thunder, finally finding its aim. Bianca approached with saccharine venom. Funny how your friend thrives while you drown. It tilted my head. So funny how drowning did not kill me. Want to try again? She blinked. Predators do not expect prey to bite back. Later, in the parlor, she tried framing Thalia for stealing Margaret's diamond bracelet, a piece heavy enough to drag a lie down with it. She slipped it into Thalia's purse with grace only sociopaths and pageant queens practice. Last life, I would have defended Bianca. Last life, Thalia would have been humiliated, expelled, ruined. But this life... I lifted the bracelet first, held it to the chandelier's harsh light, and smiled. This... Oh, it is mine. I lent it to Thalia. Honestly, it looks better on her wrist than mine. A gasp rippled like lace tearing. Andrew's jaw clenched. Margaret's pearl smile froze. Mid-gracious. I draped the bracelet around Thalia's wrist myself, locking it like proof. A gift, I said. Truth suits her. If you would, been framed once, would you stay quiet or pull the first brick out of their whole porcelain kingdom? That night, Bianca tried again with tea. This time, powder for recovery. Last life, it fogged my brain, ruined my exam, turned victory into tragedy. And this time, I slipped a tiny blue capsule into my mouth. First, an antidote I researched in motel lamplight with fury for caffeine. She stirred poison into my cup. I smiled, sweet as pie, and toasted her with it. Then poured the whole glass into a ficus. The ficus wilted. Margaret fainted into pearls. Andrew swore. I dimmed the chandelier with one line. You taught me to always test the water before diving. Silence. Soft. Trembling. Then, panic. And panic is my favorite perfume on the powerful. I did not need to scream. They knew I knew. And nothing torments tyrants like the knowledge their leash snapped. That night, as I walked away, Thalia caught my hand. "You are different," she whispered. "I died," I answered simply. "Came back with better manners." She laughed, then cried, then hugged me. "We are in this together." Last life, I believed they were my family. This life, I knew who family really was. And right then, I made a silent vow. Anyone who touched Thalia would burn worse than me. Sometimes, justice is not blind. Sometimes she sees everything and sharpens her blade anyway. Tell me now, if the bayou spit you out instead of burying you, would you return to beg God for mercy? Or build your own? Drop your answer. I want to see how you would rise. I woke to a thunderhead sitting on STT. Augustine Parish, like a verdict no one wanted to read, and the motel ceiling above me looked water-stained in the shape of a noose. If you have ever returned from your own funeral and discovered the town, preferred the eulogy, you know the weight I carried when I swung my feet to the floor, counted the bruises, and decided I would spend the day buying back my name with paper, signatures, and a little theater, because in the South, truth needs spectacle, or it dies in the church bulletin. I drove to the diner, where the waitress calls everyone sugar unless she hates you, in which case you are, madam, and I drank coffee so black it felt like penance, while I circled items on a legal pad, parish records, foundation ledgers, hospital logs from the night of my accident, and a list of reporters who did not owe the hearts a favor. I thought of the bayou and its cold mouth, of Margaret's kiss that tasted like closing arguments, and of the judges practiced silence. How power in our town wears a robe by day and an alibi by night, and I told myself out loud that I would stop moving, only when the cuffs clicked on the hands that had once wrapped chains around my ankles. Tell me, if your murder wore pearls and said grace, would you forgive the hands for being beautiful, or teach them how bracelets feel when they are made of steel? I made the courthouse my first stop because the building knows how to keep secrets so old they think they are history. Wilbur at Records, who drinks more than he files, blinked at me as if he were seeing a ghost that had learned daylight. And when I slid a bottle across the counter, he slid back the deeds, liens, and trust schedules that proved the Hart estate held more shadow than land. Margaret's Hart Scholars Fund ran money through a piano teacher in Houma, 3 shell nonprofits in Houston, and a storm relief charity that existed entirely as a P. Oh, box. My name showed up as beneficiary on a donor-advised fund that paid for gala flowers, Harrison Cole's hunting trips, and a series of wellness charges that matched the dates. I would drunk Bianca's powder and slept through exams. I scanned everything until my eyes burned. Then I walked to the clerk of court and filed open records requests for patrol logs and EMT reports from the night. My heart almost learned to stop beating, because if the river gave me back a voice, I would use it like sandpaper. Outside, heat rose off the courthouse steps in waves that made the air look like it was lying. The judge was there, Whitaker Hart, my foster father by paperwork and habit, shaking hands with pastors who bless corruption because it tithes on time. When he saw me, he performed concern the way old men perform chivalry. Pat-tipped mouth a straight line of mercy. "Evelyn," he said, "this is unwise heat." And I smiled into his good eye and said, "So is drowning your daughter and calling it an accident?" And the pastor laughed the way a man laughs. When sin reminds him, it speaks English. I did not wait for the judge's answer, because predators drag you into conversation the way they drag you into water, and I had appointments with people who did not need a script to tell good from harm. Deputy Raina Duval met me in a back office that smelled like copier, toner, and duty. She is 35, taller than most of the men who dislike taking orders from her, and the only deputy I have seen set a boundary with a smile that never reached her eyes. She listened while I slid documents across the desk and built my case piece by piece. The photographs of Bianca stirring brain boosters into my tea last fall, A lab report Thalia's cousin ran after hours, proving the powder was a benzodiazepine cocktail. Screenshots of the Heart Scholars Fund reimbursing the exact pharmacy and the exact pharmacy clerk's side business. Videos from the party where I gave the bracelet to Thalia because truth fit her wrist better than diamonds, and an invoice line for a river service paid to a bait shop that closes early on nights when boats go out without lights. Raina did not interrupt. She just drew a box around names and numbers in a notebook that has probably ended more dynasties than sermons did. And when I finished, she said, "You want this clean, like a fact and a promise." "Clean enough to live with," I answered, "and public enough that no one can launder it with a press release." She nodded, slid me a stack of victim rights pamphlets and an emergency protective order template that felt like a paper shield against a hurricane, then told me to buy a second phone, keep my routes noisy, and never go home alone until we served warrants. I walked out into noon so furious, the sun stepped back. If you had to choose between your safety and your story, which would you pick? And how many times would you choose before you learned to pick yourself? I staged Act 1 at St. Tay. Augustine High, because legacies die best where they are built. The principal had scheduled an assembly for college success. Andrew Hart swaggered in wearing a Letterman jacket that still smelled like the receipt, and the town's news stringer set up a tripod like he knew a headline when it walked in wearing black. I sat with Thalia Stone in the front row, her jaw set, her eyes the color of judgment learning to love itself. And when the guidance counselor chirped about honesty and effort, Bianca appeared at the back like a rumor. I stood, asked for the microphone the way you ask a nurse for scissors, and addressed the students and their mothers and the fathers who hate when a girl speaks like a verdict. I said that the scholarship fund had paid for the judge's golf in Destin and for Harrison's tuition in moral flexibility, that my missing test scores matched the dates of vitamin deliveries, that a valedictorian had to fight not just exams but sabotage wearing a cocktail dress. Then I told them the police were looking into it, and that Deputy Duval believed sunlight was good for rot, and that if any kid in that room had ever been told be grateful instead of be honest, they could come talk to me and we would file things together. Bianca laughed, sound like broken crystal, and said I was unstable. And I told her, instability only scares men who built their towers on a swamp, which is to say, all of them. There that afternoon, my motel room was turned over with the diligence of rich children playing sheriff. Mattress gutted, bathroom mirror smashed, a photograph of me and Thalia thumbtacked to the drywall with a steak knife. So theatrical, I almost applauded. A note on motel stationery said leave or float, gardenia perfume still wet on the paper. I filmed everything. Called Raina. And waited in the parking lot while she bagged the evidence and told me I was correct about the perfume brand registered to Bianca's boutique, and receipt already on file from a purchase, 15 minutes before the break-in. That evening, rather than hide, I dressed for war the way Southern women do when they want God to notice. Black dress, modest neckline, hair clean as a confession. The Harts were hosting a fundraiser at the River Museum for storm preparedness, so I showed up holding the storm. Harrison Cole cornered me near the decoy duck exhibit, grinned like men grin when the world lets them, and said, "You still mad you passed on a dynasty?" And I said, "I am mad I ever let a boy with gelled hair think he was thunder," and he laughed and said, "You are cute when you are righteous." And I said, "You are loud when you are guilty." And I left him staring at his reflection in a glass case. On stage, the judge introduced Margaret as a pillar, and she stepped into the light like a woman who thinks applause is proof. I waited until the band finished when the Saints, then I walked to the front with a manila envelope like a letter bomb and handed it to the only reporter in the parish who does not send copy to donors for approval. "It is all in there," I said into the microphone. The band had not disconnected. The checks, the accounts, the pharmacy slips, the tax returns that forgot to be lies. And while the room tried to decide whether I was entertainment or Armageddon, Deputy Duval walked in with 2 detectives and a warrant that looked like scripture. Margaret froze with her smile on, the judge tried to explain due process to the badge, and Bianca hid her hands like she would suddenly remembered her manicure cost someone an hour of their life. There are silences so rich you can smell the velvet on them. This was one. Then sound rushed back, glasses set down hard, whispers shredding into shouts. A woman crying because her favorite pew had a crack in it. Raina read charges in a voice that has put men bigger than the judge into back seats, and when she turned to Bianca, a hush fell so complete I could hear the gardenia wilt. Andrew started for the back door and ran into a deputy who had the good manners God gave Oak. I could say I felt triumphant, but that would be a lie. What I felt was awake, finally, in a town that prefers dreams because they are polite. Out front, thunder rolled over the river, the sky so heavy the water held its breath. Thalia found me on the steps and asked if we were safe, and I told her safety is a story. People with gates like to sell, but I promised her we were seen. She asked if I planned to forgive them when the cameras cooled, and I said forgiveness is a dress, I would stop buying 2 sizes too big. Later that night, the Dawes office asked me to come in for a recorded statement. I walked into the interview room, holding my fear by the throat, and found Margaret Hart already inside. Counsel delayed, smile back in place like a bruise covered in concealer. She asked to speak. Raina arched an eyebrow, but let the old dance have a verse, and Margaret, who had taught me to set a table and fold a napkin into lilies, he called me darling the way a spider calls a fly guest. I am sorry for any hurt, she said, voice soft enough to bruise. We were desperate. We saved you, we polished you, we invested in you, and you turned ungrateful. Do you know how that breaks a mother? I leaned forward so she could see the river, sleep still in my eyes, and said, You are not my mother. You are an investor who lost her bet and tried to sink the asset, and something in her face hardened like sugar burning. She whispered, We made you, and I said, You made a cautionary tale. And Raina cleared her throat and asked Margaret to wait with the deputy in the hall. When the door closed, I laughed for the first time that day, an ugly sound, but mine and I gave my statement in a voice steady enough to nail the windows of the house shut against the hurricane that was coming. By morning, the Harts were out on bond, their attorneys in suits the price of a small boat, the parish a bonfire of opinions. The church ladies whispered in the bakery line that I lacked grace. The men at the bait shop said maybe the Harts had gone too far this time, as if there'd been a tasteful version of the thing they did. Harrison Cole posted a slick note about praying for all involved, then texted me a photo of a rope with the caption, "Lol history," and I sent it to Raina, who called his counsel so fast. The reply arrived with the echo of the dial tone. I spent the next day with a pro bono attorney from Baton Rouge, who wears boots and swears like people who actually want justice. We filed for a temporary restraining order, requested a freeze of the Hart Scholars Fund pending forensic audit, and drafted a victim statement for arraignment that would read like a hymn with teeth. That afternoon, a boy from the high school left a note on my windshield saying he had seen something the night of the river and was afraid. I met him at St. Intrited, Jude Cemetery, where the live oaks bend low enough to show respect, and he told me he had been fishing on the far bank when the Hart SUV came. He heard laughter, a splash, and a woman say, "She will wash clean," and then a man say, "God will understand an investment." And if you have ever wanted scripture to turn into lightning, you will know how I felt when I wrote his statement in my neatest pen. That evening, Bianca tried Mercy's costume. She came to Thalia's porch with cupcakes and an apology shaped like a threat. If you keep Evelyn wound up, you will catch her shrapnel. She purred, and Thalia, who has learned to weaponize grace, said, "Then we will bleed in public," and closed the door so gently the act screamed. Around midnight, someone cut the power to my motel and stood outside my window long enough to let me count their breath. I called Raina and spoke softly into the dark until blue lights bloomed against the curtains. The shadow fled, but the lesson stayed. They would rather risk prison than accept a story they did not write. For the next morning, parish gossip split along lines clean as a scar. Those who love money more than their own, reflections said I was ungrateful. Those who remember we bury our dead with names, not account numbers, brought casseroles to the precinct. I gave interviews to 2 reporters who spelled my name right and refused the morning show that wanted to cry on camera. The DA offered a plea if Margaret flipped. The judge tried to intimidate me at the grocery store by standing too close in the cereal aisle and saying, "You are making a mess," and I put a box of Cheerios between us and said, "So did you," and left him looking like a man who could not remember which mask to wear. The arraignment turned the courthouse into theater, marble echoing with new shocks, the hearts stepping through metal detectors like they were made of it, Eleanor Cole, whispering with Harrison beside a pillar, as if wealth could bless the air and make it loyal. When the charges were read, attempted murder, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, controlled substances with intent, I watched the judge find a point on the wall and marry it. Bianca's eyes flashed gardenia bright. Andrew smirked at me like a boy who had practiced bravado in the mirror. Margaret glanced at the gallery, the way queens scan for assassins and fans. The bailiff asked if I wished to address the court. I stood and told the parish what it already knew, but needed to hear out loud that the river will spit out what does not belong to it. The tale of that family is a choice, not a costume. That a town that lets rich hands hold its throat will one day forget how to sing. I finished by saying, "Clear enough to etch the windows. Justice may arrive late to supper in CUS. Like Augustine Parish, but when she sits, she eats," and someone in the back said, "Amen." After, on the steps, a reporter asked if I hoped for reconciliation, and I asked her to define it. She said, "Peace," and I said, "Truth first, because without it, peace is just sedation, and I have sworn off sleeping through crimes." That night, rain came hard enough to sound like applause on the motel roof. I lay awake and counted the thunder between lightning and thought of every kid in this town who had been told to say thank you when they meant help. I thought of Thalia's hand steady, warm, honest, and of Raina's notebook and the way her pen does not hesitate. I thought of the Bayou, patient as a judge who has outlived his docket. I thought of you because I said I would tell this once, and I mean to keep my word. So tell me, if the people who tried to erase you asked for mercy the moment their names hit the docket, would you write a softer ending? Or would you do what I did, stack evidence like hymnals, call the deputy with the cleanest boots, and let the cameras teach the town how daylight sounds when it finally lands on the right faces? When you survive your own murder and live long enough to see the headlines call you resilient, you learn that survival and spectacle are the same currency, only minted on different sides of pity. The day after arraignment, the town woke with its throat raw from pretending shock, and every paper from Baton Rouge to New Orleans carried the same photo, Margaret Hart's hand cuffed in pearls, the judge looking up at a sky that would not make eye contact, and me on the courthouse steps, jaw set in the shape of a promise. They called it tragedy, betrayal, scandal, anything but crime. By noon, half of's tea idea. Augustine Parish had decided I was either a liar or a saint, and the other half just wanted to know who to side with before church on Sunday. Thalia brought me gumbo and silence, both equally warm. She said the phone at her parents' house would not stop ringing, that kids from school had started leaving messages that sounded like apologies, but smelled like curiosity. I told her the South does not apologize, it gossips until guilt sounds like hospitality. That night, I turned off my phone and stared at the ceiling until I saw the patterns in the plaster moving like water again. If you have ever won the first battle in a war you did not start, you know the next enemy is quiet doubt wearing your reflection's face. The DA's office wanted me to stay media neutral, which is lawyer for do not scare the donors, but I would already learned silence was a noose dressed as politeness. I agreed to one interview with a local journalist named Mason Green, a man with a smoker's cough and eyes that looked like he would seen the inside of too many false confessions. We met at the diner. He ordered chicory coffee and took notes with a fountain pen older than the courthouse. He asked what I wanted most, and I said to make sure the next girl they decide to raise does not end up at the bottom of a river, and he nodded, said that line would make print, and I told him he could have it only if he promised to spell my name right. The next morning, the headline read, "Evelyn Hart breaks silence. Justice does not come late, it waits for witnesses." The parish divided itself again. This time between those who thought I was brave and those who thought I was begging. Margaret's lawyer went on the radio and called me emotionally unstable from trauma. And the judge's lawyer said I was being used by opportunists in law enforcement, which would have been funny if it had not been the same defense he would used for half the county's wife-beaters. I drove past Hart House that night just to see what ghosts look like when they lose the deed. Police tape fluttered on the porch like cheap bunting, the windows black but watching. I sat there in my car until mosquitoes baptized the windshield, and I realized revenge does not end when you win. It just gets quieter. Like thunder retreating over the Gulf, still dangerous. If you walk barefoot in puddles, Thalia told me I needed to rest, but I could not. Sleep felt like surrender. Instead, I started working with Deputy Duval, combing through the digital mess we would pulled from the Hart computers. There were donation records, yes, but also surveillance. Hidden camera footage from the estate's basement, time-stamped nights when foster girls came and went with paperwork marked disciplinary transfers. Most were gone, now moved, married, erased. But the files named 2 still in Louisiana, both listed as terminated early. I found them. The first girl, Addie Quinn, was in Lafayette working nights at a bar. She told me she would left the Hart House at 17 after a misunderstanding involving missing jewelry, same trick they would tried on Thalia, and when I asked her if the judge ever visited her room at night, she stared at the wall and said, "He liked to check the locks." And that was enough to keep me from breathing for a full minute. The second girl, Rosa James, did not make it officially overdose, unofficially silence. I called Mason, gave him both names, and told him to find their records before someone else did. 2 days later, his article dropped patterns of misconduct at Hart residents under investigation. It went viral faster than a sermon about sin. The Day called me furious. The sheriff called me careful. The church called me pretending. But you can't uncork a truth once it tastes daylight. Protesters showed up outside Hart House, half demanding justice, half defending our pillars. Harrison Cole flew in from Houston with a new haircut and a statement about compassion for all sides, which means his family's stock had dipped since my resurrection. I watched his press conference on mute and imagined what he would sound like under oath. Margaret broke her silence a week later with a televised interview in which she wept into silk and said she loved me as if I were her own. And I sat there in my motel, eating cold fries, whispering to the screen, "That is exactly the problem you never had your own. You just bought them wholesale." Bianca was quieter, which worried me. Andrew, too, until one evening I came back from the DA's office and found a dead crow nailed to my door. The note read, "The river does not forgive twice." The handwriting was Bianca's, looping and cruel. I laughed not because it was funny, but because terror recycled loses its edge. I called Raina, who arrived with 2 deputies and a bag. She took photos, shook her head, said, "They are trying to bait you into an error," and I said, "Then I will bait them into confession." And she gave me that look people give when they realize your calm has gone beyond healthy. And that night, Mason texted me, "You have got national interest now. CNN, BuzzFeed, even Fox." I stared at the screen until it blurred. I had not asked for fame. I would ask for equilibrium. But the South does not understand balance. It understands spectacle and retribution, usually in that order. I agreed to 1 network interview under conditions. No makeup artist, no soft focus lighting, no music. I wanted it sterile, judicial. The anchor asked if I wanted the Harts to rot in prison. I said no. I wanted them to live long enough to know everyone they would ever smiled at knew the truth. He asked if revenge healed me. I said healing was a luxury for people who had not been property. After the segment aired, donations poured into the Addie Quinn Legal Fund, and for the first time since the river, I felt something close to useful. But usefulness is not peace, it is just motion. Every night, I would hear footsteps outside the motel, sometimes see headlights pause at my window, and I would grip the knife under the pillow and wonder if this was living or just surviving with better lighting. Thalia stayed nearby most nights, grading papers on the floor, pretending not to notice when my hands shook. "You should leave," she said once. They are going to come for you again. I said, "Good. Let them find me awake this time." She did not argue, but she looked at me the way people look at lightning, beautiful, fatal, necessary. The next morning, Raina called. The judge had tried to contact me indirectly through an intermediary, an accountant offering a settlement for closure. I laughed so hard, I scared the pigeons off the roof. Closure is what they gave me when they drove me to the river. I told Raina to tell him closure was coming, but it wore a badge now. The grand jury convened 2 weeks later. I was not required to attend, but I did. I sat in the back, watched lawyers shuffle evidence like deck chairs on a sinking yacht, watched Margaret dab her eyes while Bianca stared at her reflection in a spoon, watched Andrew drum his fingers until Raina told him to stop. When the foreman read the indictment's expanded charges, including conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction, sound that escaped Margaret was not a sob. It was relief. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw what fear looks like when it gives up. Pretending it is faith. The trial was set for spring. Winter dragged its boots through the parish in gray rain and small gossip. Some nights I would drive to the river and stand at the edge, watching the water move slow and black, like time pretending to be merciful. I would think about Rosa James, about Addie, about every girl who'd ever been told to smile while drowning, and I would wonder if vengeance can ever really be justice, or if it is just a prettier kind of punishment. What would you do? If the only way to get closure was to burn the house you were raised in and breathe the smoke, the parish started calling me the Bayou Bride, half saint, half scandal. Kids whispered that my ghost-haunted heart house. And maybe they were right after all. Ghosts are just memories that refuse to leave quietly. I got a job with the DA's office, part-time, helping research foster policies. Bureaucracy moves slower than repentance, but it moves. Every time I stapled a document, I thought of chains sinking. Every time I filed a form, I thought of Bianca's smirk underwater. Raina told me I was healing. I told her I was organizing. The Cole family quietly settled with the state, paying fines for improper charitable deductions, and Harrison disappeared to Florida because cowardice loves sunshine. Mason wrote a follow-up titled How to Kill a Dynasty, and the comments section turned into confessionals, people sharing stories of their own heart houses, their own betrayals. Reading them hurt and healed in equal measure. Some nights, I would scroll through until dawn, whispering replies I never posted. One said, "You are my hero." I laughed. Heroes do not drown twice. They just hold their breath longer. The trial drew near, and the town bloomed with media vans like spring's ugliest flowers. Billboards went up, some with Bible verses, some with my face next to the words, "Truth never drowns." I did not put them there. Someone else needed that myth. I was just tired. Thalia asked if I would testify live or by recording. I said live. "Now you want to look them in the eye?" she asked. "No," I said. "I want them to look at me." The night before trial, I drove alone to the bayou, parked where the dirt road disappears into reeds, and took off my shoes. The water was cold, honest, alive. I said nothing to the dark, but the dark seemed to understand anyway. The next morning, I put on the same white dress I would worn the night they killed me, washed, pressed, spotless. In the mirror, I looked like resurrection done professionally. In the courthouse, the judge would not meet my eyes. Margaret sat stiff. A statue cracked from the inside. Bianca trembled. Andrew smirked until cross-examination started. The prosecutor walked me through every detail. Every bruise, every chain link, every signature. The defense tried to paint me vengeful, unbalanced, manipulative. They asked if I would fabricated evidence. I said, "You can fake affection, not bruises." They asked if I would ever love the Hearts. I said, "I loved who I thought they were." Turns out, I was better at fiction than they were. When it was over, the courtroom was silent except for the hum of the lights. The judge finally looked at me, eyes red, and said softly, "Why did not you just let it go?" I said, "Because you did not." The jury took 3 hours. Guilty. All counts. Sentencing in a month. Reporters outside yelling questions like crows around a carcass. I smiled once, for the record. Then I left. That night, I drove to Thalia's, sat on her porch swing, and listened to the rain start again. She said, "It is over." I said, "Justice is never over. It just clocks out for the night." I looked straight at the imaginary lens of my own story, at you, at whoever's still watching, and asked, when your truth finally wins, what do you do with the silence that follows? Fill it with forgiveness? Or teach it how to scream? When the jury said guilty, the sound was not thunder. It was carpenters hammering a coffin shut in perfect rhythm, and I felt it through my ribs, like the bayou itself had learned applause. The courthouse emptied into headlines, and every news outlet from Baton Rouge to Atlanta carried my name in fonts they usually reserve for hurricanes. The Harts were remanded pending sentencing. No bail this time, and the parish that once sent me casseroles for condolences now sent flowers for closure. But closure does not grow where blood watered the roots. I rented a small house off Highway 29, single story, faded blue paint peeling like honesty in the summer heat, and every night I would sit on the porch with the cicadas screaming confessionals, wondering if peace had an expiration date. Thalia kept checking on me, still believing healing was a straight road. But I would seen enough maps to know it is a loop through every room you tried to escape. People treated me like a saint. In exile, cashiers gave me discounts. Preachers quoted my testimony from the pulpit. Strangers whispered, "Bless her heart," like a prayer for their own guilt. And I wanted to scream that sainthood is just victimhood with better marketing. Mason came by once with a microphone and said Netflix wanted the rights. And I laughed so hard, I spilled sweet tea down my shirt because nothing in this world sells faster than a woman's pain repackaged as empowerment. I told him no, I did not want a series. I wanted silence. He said silence does not pay bills, and I said neither does being a ghost with good lighting. He did not understand. Nobody who has not been buried alive ever does. The DA asked me to testify in other cases, more foster girls, more towns with familiar patterns, and I said yes, because justice, like grief, gets easier with repetition. Each deposition felt like exorcism. Different names, same script, new rivers to spit out their unburied death. Sometimes, late at night, I would drive back to Hart House, or, what was left of it, boards over the windows, the yard yellowing under neglect, the magnolias brittle as old lies, and I would stand at the gate until the moon turned everything silver and honest, then whisper to the ghosts, "See, I told you I would finish it." The first time I did that, I saw movement in the upstairs window, just a curtain swaying. Maybe, or maybe memory, so I told myself it was wind, but I left faster than I arrived. Tell me, if you could stand before the place that tried to erase you, would you knock to prove it failed, or would you burn it to make sure it never learns your name again? The sentencing came on a day so hot, even the mosquitoes gave up ambition. The courtroom smelled like sweat and justice reheated. Margaret wore beige jailhouse cotton and carried her dignity like a handbag. The judge's robe hung loose over a body that had finally remembered its mortality. Bianca wept mascara into surrender, and Andrew smirked until the bailiff reminded him the camera was rolling. The DA read impact statements mine first, then Addie Quinn's, then Rosa James's, mother's, and the judge, who was not my judge anymore, banged his gavel 3 times before speaking. "In this parish," he said, "we were taught sin can be washed clean by confession. Today, we learn some stains need concrete. 30 years each, consecutive." The gavel dropped. Margaret looked at me once, her lips forming words I could not hear, but I could read. "We made you famous." Maybe she was right, but fame is just another cage, prettier lighting. After sentencing, I walked outside into a crowd holding signs. Silence is complicity. Justice for Rosa. We believe Eve and I did not know whether to thank them or run. I gave one quote to the press. They thought family meant ownership. I just proved inheritance can be revoked, and then I left before they could ask about forgiveness. The months after that blurred, the Hart appeals denied, Harrison Cole subpoenaed for perjury, Margaret's pastor resigning in disgrace, and I found myself waking later and later because the body gets confused when adrenaline retires. I tried therapy once, but the counselor kept saying closure, like it was furniture I could buy on credit, so I stopped going and started volunteering instead at the parish foster office, sorting files, catching small cruelties in bureaucratic corners. One day, I found my own name still in the system, tagged, resolved, and I crossed it out in red pen because survival is not resolution. It is a sequel nobody asked for. Thalia and I took long drives when the walls started whispering down toward the Gulf, past refineries and rusting billboards, to beaches so flat they looked like forgiveness, trying to convince itself it was infinite. We would sit on the hood, watch shrimp boats blink against the horizon, and she would ask if I missed them. I would say no, but my hands would twitch like they remembered counting chain links. She would sigh and change the subject. One evening, she said she was leaving for law school in Baton Rouge, and I felt something split quietly, like the moment lightning hits water and both survive. I hugged her, said go win better, and she said, no, you already did, and I wanted to believe her. After she left, the nights got longer. The calls from reporters slowed, but online the noise grew. Forums arguing if I would staged the evidence, anonymous accounts claiming to be close, family friends, posting half-truths, strangers deeming me to ask what brand of lipstick I wore on the stand. I realized fame is not spotlight, it is surveillance. He deleted my socials, bought a burner phone, stopped answering the door after dark. Raina checked in weekly, still protective, still steady. One night she told me Bianca had tried to harm herself in prison, that Margaret had requested clergy, but the church declined. I did not know what to feel. Part of me wanted to pity them, part of me wanted to remind Pity what they would done to it. I asked Raina if redemption ever counts after murder, and she said, that is between you and God. And I said, God does not have jurisdiction here anymore, and she did not argue. The town held a fundraiser for foster reform. In my name, I did not attend, but I sent money anonymously, because hypocrisy loses its teeth when you feed it truth. Mason published a book about the case without telling me, and when I confronted him, he said, it is public record, and I said, so is betrayal. The book hit bestseller lists, and my name trended again. That is when letters started arriving, girls from other states, other families, thanking me for surviving loud. The one was from Addie Quinn. She said she would started college at 23, that she kept the clipping of my verdict like a compass. I cried for the first time in months, quietly, because crying is easier when it is borrowed joy. Their spring rolled into summer, and the bayou bloomed algae bright, beautiful in its rot. I drove back once more, parked at the edge where the chain used to bite my ankles, and I stood barefoot in the mud, feeling the pulse of the water. I said out loud, we are square now, and the wind moved the reeds in a rhythm that almost sounded like agreement. I thought maybe I could finally sell the house, leave the parish, start over somewhere anonymous. I even toured apartments in Austin, big windows, new air. But every time I pictured myself signing a lease, I saw Margaret's smile reflected in the glass, saying, we made you, and I could not go. Justice anchors you where the wound happened. If you think freedom means leaving, but it is really just staying without fear. One night, a knock came at the door. I froze. It was Mason, older, humbled, holding 2 coffees and a small envelope. For you, he said, from an anonymous donor. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000, memo line for the girls who never got to testify. I stared at it until my hands stopped shaking. You did that? I asked, and he shook his head, said, some stories fix themselves once they are told. I put the money into a scholarship, named it for Rosa James, because the dead deserve more than memory, they deserve momentum. A year passed. Margaret died in prison, heart failure, poetic symmetry, and the paper called her a tragic matriarch. I did not attend the funeral, but I watched from the road as they lowered her into ground, so dry it cracked. The judge refused a priest. Andrew transferred to solitary. Bianca found religion. Everyone rebranded. And I just kept breathing. The parish quieted. Hart House collapsed during a thunderstorm. Roof caved, walls buckled. Insurance called it act of God. I called it justice's handwriting. I drove there the next morning and sifted through debris until I found one thing, the silver spoon wind chime Margaret loved, dented, still ringing faintly in the wind. I hung it on my porch, not as souvenir, but as warning. Sound carries, and when the breeze blows right, it sings. People ask if I am happy now, and I tell them happiness is not the prize, it is parole. Every night I light one candle for every girl the river gave back, and one for the ones it kept. Sometimes I sit on the porch with the wind chime whispering and the frogs calling court, and I wonder how many more stories like mine live behind the lace curtains of the South. Women baptized in silence, learning to spell vengeance as virtue. Maybe one day I will move. Maybe I will write. Maybe I will let Netflix have their version. But not tonight. Tonight, I just sit and talk to you. Whoever's still watching, whoever's still deciding if I was right to fight. So answer me. Here at the end of this quiet storm, if the house that lied to you finally falls, and the world calls it tragedy, do you correct them or do you smile, sip your sweet tea, and let the ruins do the talking? They said time would sand down the edges. That one morning I would wake up and the past would be a photograph instead of a pulse, but time in Senti ID. Augustine Parish does not soften, it ferments, thick and slow, until every memory smells faintly of river mud and regret. 2 years after the verdict, people still whispered my name in grocery aisles like it might summon lightning, and sometimes it did. The air down here never forgets what it has tasted. The Hart dynasty was gone, but the soil still spoke their dialect, half prayer, half deal. The house lay flattened, swallowed by kudzu. Yet when I drove past at dusk, the outline of its roof glowed faintly, as if the sun itself refused to let it vanish politely. I would built a rhythm by then, mornings at the foster office, afternoons teaching self-defense at the community center, nights on my porch with the wind chime's cracked silver voice, reminding me that justice, like music, only exists while it is played. Addie Quinn finished her first semester with honors and sent me photos of her dorm strung with Christmas lights. The Rosa James Scholarship had its first 5 recipients, girls who wrote me letters that smelled of ink and possibility, and sometimes I would press those pages to my face just to remember what unbroken futures feel like. Mason's book turned into a documentary, not by Netflix, but by local filmmakers with cameras borrowed from the college. They asked me to narrate. I said yes on one condition, that the last shot belonged to the river, not me. When it premiered at the parish hall, the projector flickered, and on the wall the water shimmered alive, wide and black and holy. People cried. "E did not." Tears belong to the living, and I am still halfway between. After the screening, a woman touched my arm and said her sister had disappeared from another foster, in home 20 years ago, and now she believed someone. I told her believing is the first resurrection. Later, alone, I drove to the bayou again. The road was half washed out from spring storms, frogs thick on the asphalt, moon swollen and yellow like an old bruise. I parked at the edge where it had started, where chains once kissed my skin. I carried a jar of ashes. Margaret's prison sent them to me by mistake. Bureaucratic irony. I opened the lid and poured them slow into the water. The surface hissed like oil in a skillet. "You always said family was forever," I whispered. "Guess you were right, we just changed addresses." The wind rose, and for a second, I smelled gardenia. Then, nothing. I left the jar rolling in the reeds. Next morning, the news said a sinkhole opened near the old estate, swallowed what was left of the foundations. They called it geological. I called it punctuation. Life kept moving, awkward and holy. Thalia passed the bar and came home to help Raina expand the victims unit. Mason started teaching journalism ethics. God loves irony, and I learned how to sleep again. though some nights I still wake to the sound of water closing over my name. I never remarried, never left the parish. I think maybe I belong to it now, the way the river belongs to its bends reluctantly, eternally. People come to me for advice, like I am an oracle, asking how to survive betrayal, how to live after the world digs your grave and then charges admission. I tell them the truth, that surviving is not about strength. It is about spite dressed up as faith, that forgiveness is optional, but boundaries are gospel, that when you tell your story, do it loud enough that liars can't sleep. Sometimes, late, I record messages for the girls in the shelter, my voice low, honest. You are not what they did to you. You are what you do next. They write back little thank you notes with hearts over the I is, and I tape everyone to the fridge like proof that resurrection breeds multiplication. One evening a storm crawled across the parish, sky split open purple, wind howling old hymns, and I sat on the porch counting lightning until the power died. The bayou flashed white once, twice, and I thought I saw silhouettes walking its surface. Addie, Rosa, maybe the girl I used to be, then darkness again. When the rain eased, the air smelled clean, raw, free. I laughed, the kind of laugh that hurts because it does not need an audience. You are still here, listening, wondering if I ever forgave them. The truth is, I did, but not kindly. I forgave them the way the river forgives the rain, by absorbing it until it becomes nothing new. Margaret, Andrew, Bianca, the judge, they are minerals now, data in soil, lessons baked into humidity. Their ghosts visit sometimes in dreams where the house still stands and the dinner table gleams, but even in sleep, I remember to keep my seat. Daylight finds me writing again, not about pain, but about procedure. Manuals for caseworkers, so no one else falls through paperwork into water. The parish prints them cheap, spiral-bound, bright yellow covers. Kids call them the Eve Files. I pretend to hate the nickname, but secretly it feels like closure finally found a uniform it can wear. This morning I woke early, fog thick over the cypress, wind chime quiet. I made coffee, stepped onto the porch, and the world was soft, almost forgiven. I realized I had not thought about fear in months, only maintenance of truth, of memory, of small gardens that do not ask for permission to bloom. I looked toward the river and saw the surface ripple once, gentle, like a curtain closing. Maybe it was a fish, maybe it was applause. Either way, I smiled. If the bayous learn to breathe easy again, maybe so can I. So here's my last confession. The one I never said in court. I did not come back from the water to destroy them. I came back to remind the world that even in the dirtiest river, light still finds a way to reach bottom. That is all survival really is, refraction. You bend what tried to drown you into something that shines. Tell me, before you go, if your own ghost knocked at midnight and asked to share your house, would you let them in for supper or teach them how to swim? Because me, I would set 2 plates, pour the coffee, and listen until the dawn, just to be sure the bayou keeps its word.